Present, ma'am.
19,
Present, ma'am.
20,
Present, ma'am.
21, 22, 3 and 22 are absent. Okay, so we'll start with our class today. So we were doing fibro-osseous lesions. In that, we had already finished periapical cemento-osseous dysplasia and the focal variant of the same. So we were doing florid type. In florid type also, I guess we had finished the clinical features. Yes, so we'll be starting with radiographic features of florid cemento-osseous dysplasia today. Okay, so location-wise, florid type, as you all know, the florid cemento-osseous dysplasia is the variant which is very extensive. Okay, so usually it occurs bilaterally. Okay, so according to the location, usually the lesion is bilateral and is present in both the jaws. And especially it affects the mandible than the maxilla. And in the mandible also, it affects, most commonly it occurs in the posterior region than the anterior region of the jaw. The epicenter of the lesion is apical to the teeth, and it is within the alveolar process and posterior to the cuspids. So in short, usually it occurs in the posterior region of the jaw than in the anterior part of the jaw. And the epicenter of the lesion is always apical to the teeth within the alveolar process. And in the mandible, it is always seen above the inferior alveolar nerve canal and does not extend beyond the third molar regions in any case. Okay, so usually it is always limited towards the till the third molar region. Okay, so the lesion is usually bilateral and present in both the jaws. Mandible more commonly affected than the maxilla. Posterior region more commonly affected than the anterior region. The epicenter is apical to the teeth within the alveolar process and posterior to the cuspids. And in the mandibular lesions always occur above the inferior alveolar nerve canal and does not extend beyond the third molar region in any case. So here you can see the OPG of the patient affected with florid cemento-osseous dysplasia. You can see multiple mixed radiolucent and radio-opaque lesions involving the anterior and posterior regions of the mandible. Here you can see the mixed, okay, radiolucency, and at the center you can also see the radio-opacity, and it is present in both the anterior region as well as the posterior region of the jaw. So this is an example of florid cemento-osseous dysplasia. Next is periphery, which is well defined, and also a sclerotic border is present. That means a thick radio-opaque border is always present at the periphery. The soft tissue capsule may also be present, but it may not be apparent in the mature lesions. Okay, so the periphery of the lesion is well defined along with sclerotic border, and there might be the presence of soft tissue capsule, but it is not apparent in the mature lesions. Next is internal structure. The internal structure is usually the mixture of radiolucency and radio-opacity to almost completely radio-opacity. So you all know by now that the internal structure depends upon the stage of the lesion. If it is of early stage, there is only the presence of radiolucency. As the lesion matures, then there is the mixture form of both radiolucency and radio-opacity. And when the lesion is totally mature, it is completely radio-opaque in nature. And the radiopaque regions can be small oval and circular regions, giving the cotton wool appearance, to the large, irregular, amorphous areas of calcification. Okay, either the radiopaque regions could be small oval and circular regions, giving the cotton wool appearance, or it could be the large, irregular, amorphous areas of calcification. So these are the two OPGs where you can see the presence of the florid cementoosseous dysplasia. Okay, it is present bilaterally in both the jaws, in the mandible, at the posterior region. Here you can see a big radiolucency. Along with it, you can see the smaller radioopacity present within the radiolucency. So this is of mixed density. But in the second OPG, you can see there is extensive involvement of all the jaws, right? All the four quadrants, maxilla as well as mandible. And you can see the lesion has already matured and there is presence of the radioopacity in all the region of the jaws. This is the extensive form involving all the four quadrants. Then there is a next florid osseous dysplasia where also you can see the sclerotic masses which are surrounded by the radiolucencies. Okay, sclerotic masses surrounded by the radiolucencies in the mandible, and these lesions are always present above the mandibular canal. Okay, and there is presence of expansion in the premolar region as well. Next, effects on the surrounding structures. So the larger lesions, they can result in displacement of inferior alveolar nerve canal in an inferior direction. They can also displace the floor of the antrum in the superior direction. Okay, they can cause the expansion of the alveolar bone, and the roots, there can be presence of considerable amount of hypercementosis. Okay, so the larger lesions, they cause displacement of inferior alveolar nerve canal in an inferior direction, displace the floor of the antrum in superior direction, causes the expansion of alveolar bone, and results in hypercementosis of the roots as well. So that was about the radiographic features of florid cementoosseous dysplasia. Now we are moving on to the differential diagnosis. So one of the main differential diagnosis of FCOD is Paget's disease. So these are the differentiating points between the Paget's disease and florid cementoosseous dysplasia. Paget's disease, it involves the entire mandible, whereas the florid type of cementoosseous dysplasia, it is always centered above the inferior alveolar nerve canal. The lesion is diffuse in Paget's disease, whereas the lesion is more well defined with radiolucent periphery and surrounding sclerotic bodies, whereas there is presence of lamina dura in the cervical two-third. So these are the differentiating features between Paget's disease and FCOD. Next is chronic sclerosing osteomyelitis. The cemental-like masses of florid cementoosseous dysplasia, which are secondarily infected and resemble the sequestrum, have a wider and more profound radiolucent border. which is absent in the sequestrum present in chronic sclerosing osteomyelitis. Okay, so the differential diagnosis that can be given to florid type of cementoosseous dysplasia are Paget's disease and chronic sclerosing osteomyelitis. Lastly, the management part. If the lesion is asymptomatic, we can just go for the regular recall examination, oral prophylaxis, reinforcement of good home hygiene care in order to prevent the periodontal diseases and tooth loss. Usually the tooth extraction and biopsy should be avoided. The missing teeth should always be replaced with prosthesis whenever possible. So these are the management parts if the lesion is asymptomatic. Fine. So the last topic under the diseases of bone, that is the fibroosseous lesions of the bone, is fibrous dysplasia. Okay, so you all are very familiar with this disease or this lesion. So fibrous dysplasia, the synonyms, it can also be known as fibrocystic disease or osteitis fibrosa osteodystrophy. Fibrocystic disease or osteitis fibrosa osteodystrophy. It is a non-neoplastic hamartomatous developmental lesion of bone of unknown origin. The disease was explained by Waldron in 1985. So it is a non-neoplastic hamartomatous developmental lesion of bone of unknown origin. So in fibrous dysplasia, there is a localized change in normal bone metabolism where there is a replacement of the normal cancellous bone by the cellular fibrous tissues. And this fibrous tissue is always intermixed with irregular bony trabeculae. Okay. So there is a localized change in normal bone metabolism where there is a replacement of the normal cancellous bone by cellular fibrous tissue, which is intermixed with the irregular bony trabeculae. Etiopathogenesis of fibrous dysplasia. It is thought to be the result due to the post-zygotic mutation in the GNAS1 gene. GNAS1 gene, that is guanine nucleotide binding protein alpha stimulating activity polypeptide 1 gene. Types of fibrous dysplasia, we all know there are two types of fibrous dysplasia, right? That is monostotic and polystotic. And this classification was given by Lichtenstein and Jaffe in 1942. So monostotic, by the name itself, it says that there is involvement of a single bone. So whenever there is only one bone affected, it is the monostotic type of fibrous dysplasia. Polystotic fibrous dysplasia means it involves multiple bones, and monostotic form is more frequent than the polystotic form. That is, polystotic forms are at least 6 times less frequent than the monostotic form of fibrous dysplasia. Okay, so these two types were defined by or described by Lichtenstein and Jaffe in 1942. So again, in polystotic form of fibrous dysplasia, it can be divided into three headings, that is craniofacial form, Lichtenstein-Jaffe form, and the Albright syndrome. Okay, so mainly the fibrous dysplasia are of two types, that is monostotic and polystotic. Polystotic can be again subdivided into three forms, that is craniofacial form, where there is only involvement of the bones of the craniofacial complex, including the mandible and the maxilla. The second one is Lichtenstein-Jaffe form, where there is multiple bones of the skeleton are involved, and in some cases there is presence of café-au-lait pigmentations on the skin. Endocrinopathies can also be present, but these are rare. And the third form of polystotic fibrous dysplasia is the Albright syndrome, which is characterized by the triad of severe polystotic fibrous dysplasia, which is mostly unilateral, presence of café-au-lait pigmentations on the skin, and various endocrinopathies, especially the precocious puberty in girls. Okay, so these are the types of fibrous dysplasia described by Jaffe and Lichtenstein in 1942. Coming to the clinical features, in this we'll go by one, that is the monostotic form and the polystotic form. So first one is the monostotic form of fibrous dysplasia. Here you can see the clinical picture of a patient where there is involvement of the right maxilla. That means it is just involving a single bone. So this form, that is monostotic form, is limited to a single bone, and 70 to 80% of the cases of fibrous dysplasia are of monostotic form. That means this is the most common form than the polystotic type of fibrous dysplasia. The age group it involves is usually the older age group. And according to gender, the males and females are equally affected by this type of fibrous dysplasia. Site, ribs, then femur, tibia, then the craniofacial bones, and finally the humerus. And those lesions which involve the jaws, they most commonly occur in the maxilla than the mandible. So in this lesion, in this monostotic fibrous dysplasia, it involves the maxilla greater than the mandible. Okay, so maxilla is more commonly affected than the mandible. Clinical presentation, the mandibular lesions are truly monostotic. That means it is truly really limited to the single bone, whereas the maxillary lesions cannot be strictly monostotic. Okay, so there is the enlargement of the jaw and it results in the lion-like faces, and the term leontiasis osseosa can be given. And mostly the lesions are asymptomatic. Only there is presence of painless swelling or bulging of the affected site. Okay, mostly these lesions are asymptomatic and there is presence of painless swelling or bulging of the affected site. Swelling usually involves the labial or the buccal plate and seldom the lingual aspect. That means lingual aspect are not involved that much as the labial or the buccal plate is involved. Usually the growth is very slow. Sometimes it can also be rapid. The teeth of the affected area, they are firm, but they may be displaced by the bony mass. The lesion can also result in malalignment, tipping, and tenderness of the teeth. Okay, so usually there is swelling of the labial or the buccal plate and sometimes the lingual aspect as well. The growth of the bone is generally slow and occasionally rapid. Teeth may be firm, but may be displaced by the bony mass. Malalignment, tipping, and tenderness of the teeth may develop. That was about the monostotic form of fibrous dysplasia. Now coming towards the polystotic form, 20 to 30% of the cases are polystotic fibrous dysplasia. And in this, there is involvement of 2 or more bones. So in this clinical picture, you can see there is involvement of both the maxillary aspect as well as the mandible. Okay, so the monostotic form usually occurs in the older age group, whereas this polystotic form, it occurs in the children less than 10 years of age. And males and females both are equally affected. Now, sight commonly involves the femur, then tibia, then pelvis, ribs, skull and facial bones, upper extremities, lumbar spine, clavicle, and cervical spine. So these are the areas which are affected by polystotic form of fibrous dysplasia. So this polystotic form, they may either be unilateral or bilateral. Okay, so initial symptom of this form is pain of the affected limb with limp. That means there is difficulty in walking as well. There is presence of spontaneous fracture or both. The curvature of the femoral neck and proximal shaft, it increases, causing a Shepherd's crook deformity. Okay, so polystotic form, it might be unilateral or bilateral. Initial symptom could be pain of the affected limb with limp, spontaneous fracture, or both. And the curvature of the femoral neck and the proximal shaft increases, causing a Shepherd's crook deformity. The lesion, it usually becomes static when the skeletal growth stops, but proliferation may continue. It can result in expansion and deformity of the jaw and disturbance in eruption pattern of the teeth. Due to the growth or the enlargement, it results in the asymmetry of the facial bones with ballooning of the jaws, as we could appreciate in this picture. Okay, so the lesion usually becomes static when the skeletal growth stops, but the proliferation may continue. Expansion and deformity of the jaw might take place, and there is disturbance in the eruption pattern of the teeth, and there is asymmetry of the facial bones along with ballooning of the jaws. So here you can see the clinical picture of the enlargement of the maxillary alveolar process. Okay, so the buccal plate as well as the palatal aspect, both is expanded. Now the Lichtenstein-Jaffe type in polystotic form. So this involves multiple bones anywhere in the skeleton. And the most common site is the neck of the femur. Here, there is the degree of involvement of the bone is milder than in the Albright syndrome. And this type of polystotic fibrous dysplasia is accompanied by the pigmented lesions of the skin or the cafe au lait spot. And these pigments, they are present on the trunk, thighs, and oral mucosa. Okay, so this is the Lichtenstein-Jaffe type. So here you can see the fibrous dysplasia on the right side of the maxilla. There is the expansion of the buccal plate as well as buccal side especially. And there's slight expansion of the palatal aspect as well. That means there's the enlargement of the right side of the jaw. And this is the radiographic picture of the same. Okay, you can see the homogeneous radioopacity. Next is McCune-Albright syndrome. So this McCune-Albright syndrome, as discussed earlier, is a classic triad of polystotic fibrous dysplasia, cafe au lait pigmentations, and precocious puberty. Now, these cafe au lait pigmentations, these are large with irregular margins, showing the patterns of coast of Maine. So this is the clinical picture of the cafe au lait pigmentation. Okay, these are large pigmentations with the irregular margins. Precocious puberty is characterized by the onset of menses and development of breast and other sexual organs before the age of 3 in girls. So this McCune-Albright syndrome is the triad of polystotic fibrous dysplasia, cafe au lait pigmentations, and precocious puberty. All these three are required to be called as McCune-Albright syndrome. And the third form of polystotic fibrous dysplasia is the craniofacial form, where the frontal bones are more commonly involved than the sphenoid, then are the maxillary bones, and then the ethmoidal bones. And when it involves the jaws, the posterior aspect is more commonly involved than the anterior aspect. Okay, so this craniofacial form results in the enlargement of the face, resulting in leontiasis osseosa, that is, lion-like faces, and hence there is severe facial deformity, and also it results in malocclusion. If the lesions are extensive, then it results in impingement on the nerve foramina, due to which several neurological symptoms such as anosmia, deafness, blindness with proptosis of the affected eye can occur. Okay, so the extensive lesions, they impinge on the nerve foramina and results in several neurologic symptoms such as anosmia, deafness, blindness with proptosis of the affected eye. So these are the three different forms of polystotic fibrous dysplasia. Okay, before we move on to radiographic features, I guess I'll end the meeting and restart it again, okay? We'll just continue the class. I hope you guys are listening because I can see none of them have switched on the videos and I cannot see what you people are doing. So I really hope you people are listening to the class, okay? And I hope you're understanding as well, not just listening. Okay, so we were there in radiographic features. So radiographic features of fibrous dysplasia. According to location, in the jaws, maxilla is more commonly involved than the mandible with a ratio of 2:1. And in the maxilla, the posterior aspect is more commonly affected than the anterior aspect. Okay, and the lesion is always unilateral, mostly unilateral. Periphery of the lesion is ill-defined with gradual blending with normal trabeculae. But the young lesions can be well defined with the corticated borders. Okay, so usually the periphery of the lesion is ill-defined with gradual blending with normal trabeculae, and the young lesions are well defined with corticated borders. So here you can see the unilateral fibrous dysplasia involving the left side of the maxilla as well as left side of the mandible. Now, internal structure of the lesion, the density and trabecular pattern may vary. The internal structures are more pronounced in the mandible, whereas there is presence of homogeneous structure in the maxilla. Okay, so the lesion could either be radiolucent or radioopaque or mixed lesion, depending upon which stage it occurs. The maxillary lesions are more radioopaque, and even the lesions in the base of the skull are more radioopaque, but the early lesions, they could be more radiolucent. So here in these pictures, you can see there's the presence of fibrous dysplasia on the posterior aspect of the mandible. This is the early lesion, which is radiographically seen as the radiolucency. Whereas this lesion, it is more matured, and you can see the radioopacity. Okay, so depending upon the stage of the lesion, the radiographic picture of the internal structure could be either radiolucent or mixed or radioopaque. The trabeculae in the lesions could be shorter, thinner, irregularly shaped, and more numerous. And this could give the internal appearance of the lesion into different form. Either it can be of granular appearance, resulting in the ground glass appearance, or it could be of pude orange, that is the orange peel appearance, cotton wool, or amorphous dense pattern, or the fingerprint pattern. So these are the different internal appearance of the lesion. Okay. So here you can see the thumbprint appearance in fibrous dysplasia. Similarly, here you can see the ground glass appearance. In this, there is the flocules of radioopacity and giving the appearance as cotton wool pattern. And here in this picture, you can see the orange peel appearance. So these are the different internal appearance of the lesions. Then comes the effects on surrounding structures. The smaller lesions, usually they do not have any effect on the surrounding structures. As the lesion matures and as the lesion becomes larger, it results in expansion of the jaw, maintaining the thin outer cortex. Okay, there is presence of the cortical expansion, maintaining the thin outer cortex. In the maxillary antrum, that means in the maxillary sinus, if the lesion is present, then it results in expansion, and this expansion occurs from the lateral wall. And the last section to be involved is the most posterior superior portion of the maxillary sinus. And the larger lesions of the fibrous dysplasia, they displace the inferior alveolar nerve canal in the superior direction. Okay. So here in this occlusal radiograph, you can see the expansion of the cortex. And the structure, internal structure, is the orange peel appearance. Okay, there is expansion of both the buccal as well as the lingual corticoplates. Here, this is the cavity image where you can see the maxillary lesion of the fibrous dysplasia. And this has caused the lateral wall of the maxilla to expand into the maxillary antrum. Okay, this is the lesion, and the lateral wall of the maxilla has been displaced into the maxillary antrum. And in this part of panoramic image, you can see the inferior alveolar nerve canal has been displaced superiorly by the lesion in the mandible. Rarely, the lesion can result in root resorption, and it can also displace the teeth or interfere with the normal eruption pattern of the teeth. It could result in hypercementosis, and there could be loss of lamina dura and narrowing of the pedial space. Differential diagnosis. First one is metabolic disease, which is usually polystotic and bilateral, and there is no bony expansion. Second, Paget's disease, which is bilateral and occurs in older individuals. Third, periapical cemental dysplasia. The epicenter of the lesion is at the periapical region, and the lesion usually occurs in the older age group. Fourth is osteomyelitis, where there is periostal bone reaction and formation of sequestra. Lastly, osteogenic sarcoma, which shows the malignant radiological features. Okay, so these are the different differential diagnosis of fibrous dysplasia. Metabolic disease, Paget's disease, periapical cemental dysplasia, osteomyelitis, and osteogenic sarcoma. Lastly, the management of fibrous dysplasia. If the lesion is small, the lesion can be excised in toto. That means excisional biopsy can be done. Okay, but if the lesion is larger, then we can go for surgical recontouring, but it should be delayed as long as possible, as the lesion can stabilize after the skeletal maturation. Okay, so we need to wait until the skeletal maturation takes place, and if the lesion stabilizes, there is no treatment required. But if the lesion does not stabilize, then we can go for surgical recontouring. Bisphosphonate therapy, that is intravenous pamidronate and oral alendronate, can be given for the pain relief and skeletal strength. Okay, so if the lesion is small, it can be excised in toto. And if the lesion is larger, we should wait until the skeletal maturation takes place. And then we can go for surgical recountering. For the pain relief and skeletal strength, we can go for the bisphosphonate therapy. Radiation therapy is contraindicated in fibrous dysplasia because it may result in radiation-induced sarcoma, especially the osteogenic sarcoma. And this type of malignant transformation is more commonly seen in polystrotic type of fibrous dysplasia. Okay. So that finishes our long chapter, that is fibro-osseous lesions of the jaws. I hope the chapter was clear and is clear, and hope you understood everything, especially the radiological part.